Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining for our April Lee Dems meeting. I am so excited to have our half of our representatives on the call today. So everyone say hi to Tom and Al. Yay. So you two, I would love if you would talk about kind of like the midway point, right? Like the updates from, because obviously you were with us in January, so now you've got a better feel of it. And Al, I really would love to hear your thoughts, at least for the first 3 months, and how you're easing into it. Because of course, I'd love to hear if it's what you were expecting. And of course, be nice about it. And then, talk about the bills that are in your committee, talk about your committees, talk about what's happening in session. I actually personally would love to hear more about the budget because I'm fascinated that it passed on a voice vote. So I would love to hear how y'all came to that, And then talk about what bills have you gotten with crossover and like, what do you think the next couple months are going to be like? Is that okay?
Yeah,
Sure.
Awesome. And you all can decide who wants to go first. And at some point, I believe Rebecca is joining us as well. So that will be really fun to get both sides of the body behind the wall, right? So please, you guys have
Al, go for it.
You want me to go? Okay,
Yeah.
so I honestly, Amanda, when you asked like us to talk about the bills, I was like, after what's happened to me, I was trying to digest what just happened to me. So I think from municipal, we had 49 bills come through. I defended 2 of them. Nothing really terrible made it through our committee that was passed. I think the sad thing is that none of the housing bills really did pass. And it's kind of a reckoning of thinking about how to address housing in New Hampshire. In terms of like the overall bills that came through, I think the low point was maybe early March, where for the entire day we watched every single bill on any kind of common sense gun legislation fail, followed by tenants' rights all failing, followed by all renewable energy failing. So it was kind of a really long, hard day to watch. But I think in terms of, and I'm losing track of time, we had 2 days where we had a bunch of bills that finally came through. I think it was interesting because that laid the groundwork for what you're asking about the budget. There was a lot of deals that were made. 16 of the 19 education bills were tabled. A lot of the more controversial bills were tabled. So we stopped, I think, the worst of things coming through. I think that laid the groundwork for the budget. For me, what was a non-starter, what I would not have voted on the budget for was $15 million of the Invest New Hampshire money was stripped out. And I think right now, there's a bunch of communities that are going through the process. There's 3 grant proposals. They're working their way through, and to take away the money at the end of that would have been really counterproductive. So I think the budget itself was really, truly a compromise. It only occurred because we're so close, and the Free Staters would not have approved the increases in funding. And so, I mean, again, I think overall, it's been a very positive experience so far. The Senate bills have come into my committee. There's nothing that's, well, there's sanctuary cities, which is going to be painful. It's at the end of the day. And there's a residency requirement, but the rest are relatively benign. My worry is all of the work that we were able to pull through on the House side will hard to defeat something 2 times. We defeated the Parents' Bill of Rights, which was just talked about at the House side, but coming back from the Senate side, I think it's going to be a real challenge. So I think I'll pass it to Tom. He's the more senior member, can give you a better feel.
No, all the angles are pretty much equal, I would say. So I'm on Ways and Means. Our two main bills were pretty well publicized. First, we decided to table all of the tax reduction bills, but again, we knew that the Senate could still do them. But I was very disappointed in the budget that they did eliminate the interest and dividends tax. And it was done because some of our members sided with them. But the interest and dividends tax, in my mind, is very fair. If you have $100,000 in interest and dividends, which means you're a multimillionaire, you pay New Hampshire $4,000. To me, that's very reasonable. But what it's going to do to taxpayers is the loss of 160 million a year forever. So like for the decade, it's a loss of 1.6 billion. So it's a permanent cut and it's a permanent shift to local taxpayers. So I was very disappointed in that. And we have some millionaires on our side, and you could tell who they were. They even were written up in an article. But I understand people vote for what they think is, the best approach. The other big one that came to us as a second committee was the marijuana legalization bill. It did pass the House by a veto-proof majority. It came to Ways and Means because it had to do with money. And it was very complicated because the Republicans do not want to have taxes. And the marijuana bill had a retail level tax. And so one of our members, who I mentioned earlier, had a tantrum and said, I've signed a pledge, we cannot tax marijuana. And so what they did is they called it an excise tax that they're taxing on the wholesale level. So it's not the same bill that came to us in that area. The other thing they changed is the money is no longer going to education. The money is all going to tax relief. And so, we weren't really, some of us, happy with that. Let's see, what was the other part? Again, it was a very tricky discussion because at first everyone was very gung-ho, let's legalize marijuana. But once the word tax came up, suddenly, there was a major shift. And then some of us felt, we'd been misled when the money was supposed to go to education, and it's not. We won't see any profit until probably 26. And it was almost impossible to figure out if there would be profit. Typically, all of the startup money that is needed, which is, I don't know, 5 million one year, 8 million another, whatever, has to be paid back before any of the money goes to tax relief. So again, it's leaving New Hampshire putting in nothing. Also, the Liquor Commission didn't really want to deal with it, so they're going to have to be separate cannabis stores, and that's going to take a long time to set up. But anyway, that really took a lot of twists and turns. What we have coming now from the Senate, mainly from one person, is a lot more bills expanding gambling in different ways. And, it all has different names and different reasons, but basically the idea is to expand gambling in New Hampshire, even though we don't have a casino. So today I missed like 6 of those bills. So I had to see my mom today for an appointment. But I'm very used to them. We've had them before, but now they feel they can get passed. So we got a whole bunch of those. And I don't know if they'll be on party lines or not. As far as the future, I am very concerned about the final budget. I'm wondering if they are going to try to put the Parental Bill of Rights in the budget. The governor said he likes the bill. The bill is sponsored by all 14 Republican senators, which is very unusual. And they have a 14-10 majority. The marijuana bill, to be veto-proof, would have to be 16-8 in the Senate. So we're not quite sure how that's going to go. Initially, someone said the governor had finally agreed to go along with it, but the last article I saw said he still planned to veto it. But as you know, he's on a sort of his own little tightrope as far as what's going on. The other thing I'm worried in the budget is that the Senate will actually want to cut revenue, even though more revenue is available because they get to use the April-March estimates, which are higher than what we had to use from February and what the governor had to use in December. That's why usually the Senate has extra money to spend. But The Senate is not like the old Senate it was, years ago. It used to be the compromise, more moderate group, and because of some new members, it's actually tilted more extreme than us sometimes. So I'm very concerned about what that budget's going to look like. I'm concerned that they're going to put us in a bind and say, look, there are raises for state employees, police and fire. How can you vote no? And then pit us against schools and transgender people in the process. So I am concerned about that, but again, keeping an open mind, and I've done what I can do. So, it may be settled in June, it may not. I think they do know that if they tilt it too negative, the budget will not pass the House. And then they'll have to have a continuing resolution to pay some people in the summer, and we'll be back in September. But I'm hoping our leadership can make it clear that, the attacks on public education and so on are not going to fly. And our caucus did vote unanimously for the previous budget. So we could unanimously vote in block the next one.
That's wonderful. Thank you both so much for that update. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Sue.
When you say you're putting money to tax relief, stupid dog. Whose taxes are getting relieved?
Well, again, it's kind of smoke and mirrors. There are two parts that are large. We have to give some of it to advertising and mental health support for people who have problems with cannabis. So that gets about 10%. And we have some startup money in there. But I want to say, and it's written up clearly, but a little bit more than half goes for property tax relief under what they call the SWEPT. And the SWEPT is the amount of property tax that communities put towards public education, but it's a formula. And when they reduce SWEPT, the money doesn't go to the schools, it just reduces what a town has to put into SWEPT. The problem is it's a very small amount. You're talking pennies for some voters. So it's nothing big. It's not like what we did when we were in charge. We gave 100 million directly to the schools.
Right.
This is just reducing SWEPT, which is a trickle. It's not something big at all. And the other thing is to reduce what they call the unfunded liability in the retirement system. And that's the money that cities and towns should have paid in the 90s, and they did not. They were given a kind of holiday, and the regulation said they had to repay that. And so there's a part of retirement that is just repaying what should have been paid in the 90s. And that's fairly large because it's interest and everything else. But again, they already in this budget put 50 million into it, but it's 3.5 billion. So putting 50 million in it might help someone in 20 years a little bit. I mean, it's a good investment. It's like paying off your mortgage early. So that part of the math works. But as far as something taxpayers are going to notice, they're not.
No.
And this isn't even going to start till 2026.
Okay.
No, I'll throw in actually one thing, since you talked about property taxes. One thing that was positive about the budget was they reworked the adequacy aid. And when you looked at the new numbers that came out, actually Oyster River comes out okay. Lee comes out the best of all three communities. It was really harsh. The adequacy that had come out of finance was really going to punish our most vulnerable communities in New Hampshire. And so that was redone. So I think for me, that besides the housing, that was really the major one. So again, always, as I said, for your local property tax, that helps all of us.
I did, and I don't think we want to spend a lot of time now. I did do a chart of it on a rainy day. Sadly, it is a little bit smoke and mirrors, that even though they did better by some, it's not much. I mean, a community that needs 10 million is maybe getting 2 million. So it's still really leaving communities hurting. But I will, if there are going to be some other questions, I think it is behind me, so I will grab it. But he's right. Lee did get a chunk more. Dover got 1 million more. But again, that will win back a few teachers. Dover just cut 11 teachers.
Yeah.
So, $1 million isn't even going to bring us back to where we were. It's good. I'm glad Dover's getting it, but Dover needs about 6 million. So,
Better than nothing. Better
yeah,
than nothing.
that's right. But of course, we can say that so many times, right? I mean, the state raises, they're giving them 10% in July and 2% the next July. That's not even going to catch them up to inflation. And it's
No.
not going to make up for the years the governor wouldn't even negotiate with them. But again, we're glad, but it is, it's a drop.
Well, I mean, to that, Tom, that with the adequacy aid and all that, again, look at like how much went into the freedom accounts. And
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like they just honestly, the idea that you can take $4,700 and go find a private school is false. And I think they're using that to pull money out that, as Tom pointed out, if you put that money into adequacy aid, it would certainly help many communities.
Yes. And they want to, basically, it's the national movement to privatize education. So it'll be for profit and it'll be mainly for wealthy people. And again, it's a national movement that has come to New Hampshire. And we were able to block on the House side a major expansion of the vouchers. But that's the goal. They're just going to keep pushing every year. And it's very hard because some of the schools that get the vouchers send their kids to be lining up the halls, begging us, whatever. Public schools aren't going to do that. So we don't see the public schools coming to fight for themselves because they're in school.
Well, we did. We actually, Oyster River were part of the Conval lawsuit. So we've been in the lawsuit that's working its way through,
Yeah.
which I think was really we felt it was, we could not allow the poorest districts to fund the lawsuit, to fight for funding, and have the wealthier districts sit on the sidelines worrying about what happened to them. So I think we'll see.
Oh, I think that was a positive. Yeah. I'm looking up Lee right now.
I have a question.
Lee gets $400,000 more starting next year.
So about the voucher program, the lawsuit, is there a component where we're objecting on religious grounds that?
No, the Supreme Court has decided that. The Supreme Court says if you give vouchers, you have to give them to religious schools and any kind of private school.
So they want
So
me,
it's all or nothing.
who is not Christian, to fund Christian schools.
Yes.
And are they cool with then Christians supporting madrasas?
Well, again, it was, it hasn't gone through our court recently, but the Supreme Court decision basically said, if you were going to give parents vouchers, that they did have a right to pick what school they wanted to use them at. It wasn't quite
That's
tilted.
public money. How dare they?
Well, no, but what they said was, if you don't want to do that, don't give vouchers. But they just said, if you do, you have to let the parents have choice.
Well, I like what Maine did. Did you know what they did when that came up there? They just said that any school that any student that got the voucher and went to a particular school, that school had to accept anyone.
Yes, and that's why our law is not good at all.
No, we need that.
Yeah, and our law says that schools can openly discriminate. It's written right into the law.
That's awful.
Yes, yeah, I don't see how that stands, but it's there.
Well, and it wouldn't do any good to take it up to the US Supreme Court for sure.
Yeah. I did take it to the education department because, as some people may know, we had a local student who was expelled for being gay, and it was on the front page of Foster's for a while. And he was a senior. He was #1 in the class. And oh no, he was transgender. He wanted to change his name. And they basically read him the Bible and kicked him out. He had a happy ending because he went to Noble and went to a good college. So I followed it. But I took it all the way to our state department. And I said, don't they have to follow New Hampshire's anti-discrimination laws and so on? And they said, no. All they have to do is register the number of teachers, the square foot in the building. They don't have to sign anything about discrimination. And I went all the way to Edelblue. Of course, I got nowhere.
No, well, yeah, you wouldn't get anywhere with him.
The good news is, unfortunately, this was smoke and mirrors. In Dover, I think 8 children have left to take the vouchers in a city of 30,000. So, the children in public school have not been drawn to this at all.
No,
It's been very
no,
small.
that's one of the reasons I really object to it. It's just, we're funding the people who already were going to private
Yes,
school.
correct.
And we're giving them a nice public bonus for going to a private school. How dare they do that to us?
Well, they want us to be like Florida, which you may know just passed. Everyone gets a voucher, including Barron Trump. He will get a voucher to go to his private school. It's going to cost Florida $4 billion. But
I don't know.
we're fighting it. I mean, we fight it every way we can. But the
No,
government
I know.
and
I
Edelblue
applaud
really
you for
pushes
that.
this. They send people door to door to try to get them to do vouchers.
The irony is actually both Dover and Oyster River do accept tuition students. The thing is, we don't take 4,700. Well, actually, it was like less than 4,000. I think they're pushing up to 4,700.
Yeah.
We asked for about 19,000.
Yeah.
So it's really a ridiculous program.
And they keep saying, just to have it on the list, homeschool, religious school, private school, or another public school. Well, again, many public schools do not take tuition students. So it isn't even, a parent can't just say, I want to go to school X.
No.
Because many school boards have regulations that they'll only take tuition students if they have space.
Well, and they only take tuition students if we have a tuition agreement.
Right.
So
But
I mean,
just a random student.
yeah, a random student can't come to Oyster River.
Yeah.
It has to come through if a random student did try to come to Oyster River, they would have to pay the full freight of $20,000.
But that's a good point, Alan, because in a way, schools have been addressing some of these issues without any help of vouchers or Edelblue. I mean, many schools have some good systems for all of that. And I even know from my work, we had some special needs students that needed a small, quiet school like Newington or Newcastle. And we'd just make an agreement to have them go there. They weren't really behavior problems and they would blossom. And it would just be like an agreement between the boards that this will help this child.
That's great.
And I had told Amanda that I have, especially from Lee, getting different messages supporting different causes. So as you probably know, I got shifted out of Dover to Lee and Madbury. So I'm glad that I'm hearing from my new constituents. And so far, they've all been great. They've all been things that I really agreed with and so on. A couple of our naysayers have been very quiet, haven't they, Alan?
Yeah.
You haven't heard their names ever again.
No.
Hey, Tom, I have a question for you, just out of curiosity. Since Ways and Means does deal with so many taxes, and when you were talking about the marijuana bill and the tax being flagged, how is the tobacco tax? Like, was there, I'm assuming that there was a relationship talked about between the two, and like what that conversation look like?
Well, you can imagine it was like a pretzel because, the original bill basically put cannabis on a level with alcohol and cigarettes. And we passed that bill, like I say, by a veto-proof majority. So it had already been passed, and that's the way it was written. And then it came to Ways and Means, and suddenly they were like, oh, no. Then people can say that we did a tax. And they made up this phrase excise tax on wholesale. It's still a tax and still people are going to be paying it indirectly. But they just would not think for a minute. They didn't want anyone to see a slip of paper that said, this was your pot and this was the state tax. Like I say, one guy had a tantrum and he just said, I signed a pledge, there's no way we're going to do that.
And of course, we all know taxes are theft.
Yeah. Well, and there's a new one too. We were talking about investing in educational things, and they just said investment's another word for tax, which is another word for fraud. So
Yeah, Al, last year when we were talking about very similar topics, somebody joked that there should be a bingo card. And in session, whenever someone mentions tax, like that
Yeah.
would be your center square because it was brought up so often. So
Especially when they say the ridiculous phrase tax is fraud. You know, they silenced Peter Bixby from Dover when he got up and spoke, and he said, you know, you're always bringing up the Constitution. The Constitution says we're supposed to be taxing people fairly. And they voted to have him sit down. They wouldn't let him even finish talking.
oh, poor Peter.
Well, it was fine because then he just put it in writing and then we sent it out to everybody.
Yeah, but such a sweet, quiet soul. Like I just feel bad for him.
Yeah, but that's where they're at.
Okay. And then I just have one random question that none of you are going to care about, and I apologize, but I was thinking, especially because, you know, baseball season has started and Massachusetts has now allowed sports betting. How has that impacted New Hampshire? And I'm sure it's a conversation that you all have been having in Ways and Means.
Yes, no, well, of course, again, Amanda, you know well what we talk about.
Yeah.
They don't think it's going to have a huge impact because it is still young and expanding. So they feel it still has quite a ways to expand just in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Again, we're real uncomfortable with it, especially on college campuses.
So Amanda, I'm a Red Sox weekend season ticket holder, and actually I went yesterday because my wife ran Boston. I always go to the Red Sox Patriots Day. So my suggestion with the gambling thing is please bet the over on the Red Sox because they're
So I'm a season ticket holder myself. I was there on Saturday, so I can appreciate that. That was a very long game yesterday with all the rain delays. So good for you for holding out for that. Any other questions? Because I could go on a tangent. So many questions that I have, but I can talk.
Those areas are going strong, basically, because Keno has expanded and so on. So, you know, we haven't reached saturation yet. And that is the question that is often asked is, when are we going to have too many choices for ways to gamble? And so far, you know, they don't feel we've reached saturation. And you may have seen that even some of the Keno places are now calling themselves little casinos.
Yes. Definitely. The one in Dover or Rollingsford, my apologies.
And the Dover one, I haven't been there, but several times I've seen it absolutely packed when I've, you know, gone in to wash my car or something.
Yeah.
I may go someday when it's quiet. I did Keno once. I gave myself 5 $1 bills and I only matched 2 numbers out of my 5 plays. So I thought, you know, the odds weren't for me. I did a scratch ticket yesterday and got $10. So that's more my style.
Congratulations. Yeah, the house always wins. Any other questions for these two before we move on to Rebecca? And we can always come back to Tom and Al, but I feel bad that Rebecca's been hanging with us. So any other questions?
Oh no, go for it.
Okay, cool. Rebecca, welcome. Thank you so much. I'm glad you have your little ones with you.
Hey guys, how are ya?
Good. Thank you for. Oh, hi. I tried waving, but yeah. Hi. She's in awe of us. That's cool.
Yes. Did you notice the bedtime stare?
I understand that. Thank you for joining. Would you mind just briefly chatting about like what has happened in the Senate for like the first half of the year and how was crossover and how has been all of your sessions and what do you like see for the rest of the year?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's only my 3rd year up there now, but it feels like an unusual year. I applaud the House because I think that the House Republicans are making the Senate Republicans look terrible because they just are not in the same spirit of compromise on low-hanging fruit. So it's crossover has occurred and we really had already started our work on House bills in March. And so I finished one of my committees today because we got so few bills from the House that were already done. And I think we have 4 or 5 more left in my other committee. So it feels a little weird because we've got all this time till June. But we're sort of finishing our work. So that's a strange dynamic, but I think in terms of the items that are yet to come, obviously, making sure that we're protecting what we've tabled on the Senate side to go into the budget sort of turns to be the focus. And a big issue of mine, which I think you guys know, is housing. And so I had the Housing Champions Bill this year, which is a $28 million grant program for cities and towns to support their certification as housing champions. So it's, there's so many available for them to support them as they take housing friendly actions, and then other grant programs that are available if they qualify for sewer and water and for housing units that come online. And so that passed both out of committee and out of finance and on the floor twice. And so that's been tabled and is part of about $94 million on the Senate side for housing to go at what was 0 and then was 15. And it, I think, came in at the end at about $30 million on the House side for housing. So we'll see how those things line up. But there's, obviously a lot of conversations going on around that. There were also a few childcare bills that are part of that got tabled. I had a childcare bill that made it out of the Senate over to the House, so I've been trying to support that. I had 12 of my 17 bills get out of the Senate, so that's good. And they sort of run the gamut, but I would say, I received some bipartisan compromise on 2 of my LGBTQ focused bills, which support allowing same-sex couples, to more easily use the court system when they go through assisted reproduction, and then doing a cost study to sort of expand insurance coverage in those cases. So those were both bipartisan votes, and those are up in the House tomorrow. But then it's the opposite on, I'm sure you guys saw, reproductive rights, and we had those lovely bipartisan bills both come over from the House and killed them both on Thursday on party lines. So some wins, some losses. I think education is a big part of the story. I heard you guys talking about that at length. So I won't go into that at all, but I'm watching what we're doing with the state employee wage raises, retirement benefits, retention bonuses, like that whole package, just because there's so many vacancies and it's such an important fairness issue. Even just things like I visited our local liquor store, and those guys are working around the clock, doing hard labor. Their weeks backed up, and they're paid less than new hires that come in right next to them. So it's just, it's like it's service across the board by the state employees. So watching that. And then, I'd say, I'm just trying to think of what else has sort of been a big issue. There's been a few things around the primary, nothing too controversial, but we did sort of see the unprecedented action of the Republicans, like, trying to bring partisan resolutions about the primary, which unfortunately is something that up until now has been a bipartisan issue. So some warning shots across the bow there. But, we'll see. Many fights yet to come. I know the 272 hearing was today over on the House side. And so I think just trying to keep things on the level and, bring the budget amendments we need to bring is good. One big issue I've been involved in that's not super exciting or glamorous, but is some of the licensing procedures over at OPLC. There's been sort of a big overhaul of that and sort of how that works, and the 50 boards of professionals that it affects, and the disciplinary procedures and the fees, and just sort of the staff discretion. And so again, not most glamorous or headline making news, but affects a whole lot of people in our state. And so I've been working with Representative Jackie Grody, who I think some of you guys know out of Rye, to just sort of sync up across House and Senate and make sure we're taking care of all the folks that are subject to that. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Happy to answer any questions, but exciting year as always.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for Rebecca?
I do. I know you're interested in energy, so I'm wondering what's going on in terms of energy for either the House or the Senate.
Yeah. So I'm not on that committee anymore, which is a huge bummer. I loved being on that committee, but we just, the schedule wouldn't work out. Some wins, I think that one of the big issues I wanted to bring this year, and I worked really closely with David Waters on, was grid modernization. So, I think just making sure that our utility infrastructure is ready for distributed generation and renewables it's like building the right foundation for your house, right? And the way it works right now is that if a new renewable project wants to connect to the grid, the best analogy I've heard for it is that for every car that wants to get on the highway, they have to build their own on-ramp. And so individual projects are paying for all the upgrades to the grid required for them to become part of the system. There are other ways to do this. There are ways to have the utility kind of like look ahead into the future, make smart capital investments, build a grid that meets our policy goals. But of course, we all have to agree on our policy goals in order to kind of set that up. So David Waters and I worked really closely on a bill that he brought and has gotten over to the House. At this point, it's sort of stripped down to a pilot program on renewables and then an advisory committee inside the Department of Energy on grid modernization. But I still think it's a win because there's expertise in the state that's not being used. Sorry, we got a little fall down. And so even if we can kind of get that expertise injected into the process formally, I think that's a good thing. There's been a couple minor expansions of net metering that made it out of the Senate on a bipartisan basis. And we're sort of waiting to see what Chairman Vose will do with them. But, we've heard that he's just sort of vehemently opposed to any incremental expansion there, which of course supports renewables. But, I even have a bill that's as simple as like allowing housing authorities to use net metering instead of just their tenants. And apparently that might even be an issue. So we're working on it, Deb. There's some things happening. And, I think offshore wind remains a big question mark. There's obviously huge benefit to my district from that. And I think the preparedness around that is really not being done by the administration. And so, again, Senator Waters, hello. Senator Waters and I, have been working together on that, but he really has been doing the lion's share of the work for many years. And so I'm trying to slot in and be a pair of hands where I can. But, our businesses are asking sort of like, when should we prepare for this? And how do we look ahead in terms of like retrofitting and, just sort of supporting this industry? And the state is not answering those questions for them. And so I think as senators, we're just trying to piece together whatever we possibly can to support them and just sort of make sure we're not going to miss the opportunity, to have that industry present off our coast and lower our electricity bills and create a new good baseload of power. So working on a variety of things, Deb, not tons of results yet, but lots of effort.
I have to say, Rebecca, that the renewable thing really blows me away. You can't make a conservative argument against the renewables because it stabilizes your costs. And that's, as I stood next to my seatmate, convicted felon Jason Gerhardt, I was trying to explain how that helps a municipality and a school by stabilizing your energy costs. It allows you to budget more effectively, and it was lost on them. I just don't understand the argument.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Senate Republicans have seemed to really kind of like solidly embrace an all of the above strategy. Like they've sort of put their votes where their mouth is on that stuff. It's sort of the House that really still continues to not see the irony of how it's regulation that's preventing renewables from coming to the grid, and they are supposed to be our small government folks, right? But I do think that, you know, what Cliff Below and others have done with the Community Power Coalition, I think is really demonstrating some of the ways that we can work around, you know, these barriers. And so I think that'll be sort of a powerful agent of change in the state. But without investing in our infrastructure, it's all for naught, really, because so you guys, I don't know who knows this, but I work in renewables. You know, I'm general counsel of a small renewables firm. And so what we're seeing in Maine and Mass and other markets that I work in, like Delaware or Pennsylvania, you know, is like nobody has the perfect answer on how these projects should connect to the grid, but we certainly can learn from the mistakes of these other states, you know, in what we bring to New Hampshire. And so I think that's the goal. And it's just such a necessary piece to this puzzle that New Hampshire has just really not paid much attention to at all. So
you're going to be getting a bill, which you may know about, which requires Eversource to put on people's bill the amount that gets taken away for renewable energy. Of course, they can't calculate that. So they have made up a number that is not true. But the bill says that number will be on everyone's electric bill, even though it is not true. So hopefully we'll amend that. So because they averaged all the big businesses, everyone, and then said, you know, the rate is blah, 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 but it's not true for the individual at all. So it's just to get people mad at renewable energy.
Yeah, we had, I think that was another one we saw, Tom, yesterday or last year, that was related, where it was, you know, that municipalities could opt out of that alternative compliance payment, you know, related to renewables. And the utilities were like, I don't even know how I would meter or figure that out. You know, it was like a ridiculous paperwork exercise for what? Yeah. Well, I will keep my ear out, Tom, with your advice in mind.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, a friend told me she had gone to a car dealer to buy an electric car and was told that, oh no, we're not selling them in New Hampshire because there aren't enough charging stations here. And so I'd like to know, is there any movement on somehow getting more charging stations for electric cars in New Hampshire? My understanding is Nunu is more or less an obstacle.
Yeah, as usual.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a little bit like we're trying to guess the favor of the king on all things energy. And, you know, for the most part, we get these mysterious nods, which I'm sure Amanda is so familiar with. But, you know, the movement we're seeing on charging stations is largely private and, you know, will happen, but there's definitely opportunities at the federal level that we're not taking advantage of, because the mandate is to see a charging station, you know, every 50 miles. And so if we had a plan, then we could act on some of that. And, you know, same for grid, for the record, like there's $15 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law for grid. So, you know, I think at the same time, we all kind of shake our heads like it's our job to be in there trying to get what we can. And so charging stations is not in my direct wheelhouse, but I know Senator Waters has been on it constantly. And so I'm happy to look into it in more detail and get back to you, Sue, but I'm not aware of us doing something comprehensive in any way.
Yeah, because we'll just not be able to expand our, you know, retire our gas guzzlers until there's a way to charge the cars.
Absolutely. absolutely.
Well, that brings up a really good question, Sue, because didn't the federal government announce like last week that by 2024 or 2026 or something like that, like 3/4 of the cars that are being sold have to be EV?
Yeah.
I
they
think
just
2/3
did.
by 2030. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Governor doesn't seem to have gotten the message though.
He's busy. He's busy.
Yeah, he's busy out of the state. He's running all over the country, pitching himself.
They're
I have
holding
to tell you that
all
the
the money for
sentiment
our
in
new,
Portsmouth, 2 days after we had that school shooting threat, to watch him at the NRA was the sentiment is not good around here on that. No.
Well, my opinion is if anything had actually happened, he would be complicit because he's the one standing in the way of gun safety legislation and or consistently standing in the way of it.
Yep, not just him. There are many.
Yeah, but
Yep.
he vetoed it.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, I've had several businesses reach out to me and say, like, can I, this has been a frequent constituent question, can I ban firearms, like on my private property? And I mean, right now under, I think it was SB 38, I forgot the exact bill number from a couple of years ago. There's, we literally have a policy that like towns and cities and businesses can't really act on this issue, and so it's, I don't know, it just seems really, really anti-common sense what we've got going right now.
Yeah,
I don't know how they justify it,
yeah.
but
I think you and I were probably the only ones on this call that were in the House when they had the bill that would how schools have no gun zones.
yes,
And they would always fight and say, well, schools are safer with guns.
yeah.
And I never could quite wrap my head around the argument with that bill. But
Well, again, I felt nervous driving through Concord today and seeing the two opposite groups, some in camouflage and some women and children. And
Yeah.
someone could have had an AK, whatever there, and that would have been perfectly
Yeah.
legal. The police couldn't have
Yeah.
said anything. They could have stood right there next to the transgender group with their AKs, and
Yeah.
that's fine.
yeah,
But the person
Yeah.
who made a threat at Portsmouth, if he hadn't made a threat, he could have kept his guns. But because he didn't make a threat, now he's in hot water. Maybe.
Gotta be in jail, hot water.
Mhm.
I was going to say just briefly too, many towns and cities need to replace their voting machines. And the
Yes.
state has several $1 million to go for new machines and will not
Yes.
release them. He will not
Yes.
release the money.
That was actually one of my bills this year, Tom, was for them to create a grant program out of those HAVA funds. So these millions of dollars that Tom is talking about, he has $12.9 million. That is from 2002, just sitting there. And so, yeah, I mean, our vendor has not guaranteed that our software will work beyond the 2024 election. So it's like an urgent issue that we need to replace our voting machines, and that's not the money they want to use. So I even tried to change my bill so that we could take advantage of federal monies available, because I think there's a few million out there, but it went down on party lines. But I hear there's an amendment over in the House, so if you can do something, that'd be great.
And have you heard that you're going to have more money for the budget? There are different rumors. You usually do, because the April, May extra money comes in.
Yeah, I have heard rumors, but I haven't seen anything yet. Yeah.
Thanks. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you'll spend it on good things.
Let's hope so. Yeah, thanks for all your hard work on that, Tom. I'm sure it was a lot of hours.
does anyone have any other questions for our wonderful representatives and senator?
Yeah, nice to see you guys.
Yeah, it's always nice to see you. Thank you all for being on. So with that, is this our meeting? Are we all set?
Thanks for having us.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Awesome. Bye.
We're just learning to talk over here, so.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Oh, you get a hug.
That's like the perfect way to end a meeting.
Night.
Awesome. Good night, all.
Nice to see you.
Right.
All.